Today we are going to start with a zinc plate, and we're going to learn how to cut it in our studio, and then we will go over and bevel our edges. We'll talk about that. We will polish and degrease the plate, and after that we will have another video where we apply a hard ground and prepare it for our line etching. This is a test plate, so it doesn't have to be very accurate. It also, we're going to be cutting this into strips, into 2 strips, and so you know, ideally it'd be a little bit longer, but this is fine. So I'm going to cut this in half. If this was a plate for an artwork, I might have something very specific in mind, so I would consider that when I'm working with this. So I'm going to come over to my plate cutter. This is the blade, this is the plate bed, and if I look down here, that is where the cut is actually going to occur. This is going to come down and it's going to make contact here, and it'll cut this in 2. This yellow, I'm not sure what it's called, I call it a foot. When I press down on this, that makes contact first and it holds this in place, and then it makes the cut. So I like to line things up first, and I can see my little Sharpie mark there, and if I look down this gap I can actually see the other mark that I made and just make sure that that's accurate. This is a small plate, so you know, you have to be very careful. You want to make sure your fingers are not in the gap. And I like to take this piece of mat board and just slip this underneath the foot. It's much easier with a larger plate, but that will prevent these metal feet from scratching the plate. I'm gonna go ahead and step up on this, and it makes a cut. So here is one piece, and here is the other. So I have 2 here. The next thing that we're gonna do, I'm actually gonna switch to a slightly larger piece here. So I'll take one of these, and I'm just gonna bevel the edges now. So what I want to do, I'm gonna open up my drawer here, and I have a lot of files that I've collected over the years. There's quite a few in here. I'm probably gonna go for the largest one that I can find right there, and I'm gonna get a couple of clamps. There's lots of different types of clamps that we have here. This one, you push the button and then this will tighten. I prefer that one, and we've got ones like this. What you want to be careful of is that whichever clamp you choose to use, that there is, some of these have metal here. You just don't want the metal to be making contact with the zinc plate, because it could easily scratch it. So I'll put some of those away. Actually, I'm going to take off my mask because I am all alone in here. I'm going to find a nice corner. There's a few other tables that you could use. Find a corner that suits you and your height, and I'm going to position this so that I have the most access to 2 edges. I'm going to try and get 2 edges on this first one. Make sure that that doesn't wiggle around on you, and I want to put my fingers underneath, because if I accidentally scrape in, you know, if I'm not used to how this works, I might scrape the surface of the plate where my image is going to go. So I like to put some fingers under here or hold it like this, just to prevent that from happening. And I want to go at about a 45-degree angle. I don't want to make the angle too steep, I don't want to make the angle too narrow, something in between here. I want to go right over to the edge. A lot of people will be very timid with this at first, and it might take a long time. I've seen people do this for like an hour and they're still working on one side, and they switch around a lot and they don't seem to get a lot done very quickly. So I like to really put a little bit of force behind it. Use the entire file instead of just like this, you know, use the entire file. You can kind of tell if you're doing it right by the sound it makes here. Maybe I'll switch over here. And then you can see this is kind of in the way a little bit. So I might make a little adjustment. And that is pretty good for this. I could do this more, but with a test plate, it's not that big of a deal. If you're doing a really deep etch on your plate, then you might want to take a little bit more care with this. I like to sometimes do this again before I actually print, just to clean up my borders in case there's any foul biting. Almost there. So you can see I have to kind of change my position a little bit as we go. I find these small plates for test strips a little bit more difficult than regular plates. Because they're often long and you don't have a lot of surface area to clamp onto. So there we go, that's pretty good. And that's about right. So, you know, if I'm looking at a cross section of the plate, it would look something like this. And I want it to look something like that. So I'm just taking off that little bit. You know, you don't want this to come to a sharp point like this, because then you're gonna get all kinds of foul biting occurring around here and your edges will be a little bit rough. So, you know, we don't want to have it come to a perfect point like that. Next thing we're gonna do is bring it over to the sink, and I'm gonna peel off the protective plastic coating. So this just helps prevent any dings and scratches on the plate. There are cases when you would have to polish this. You might need to sand it down and then use some Putz pomade and polish this to a mirror finish. You can also recycle plates, and there's several methods of doing that. So if you've got a used plate, you can bring down the surface to look brand new again. Actually, I did forget one little step. I'm gonna come over here and grab some sandpaper, like 220 grit, and my sanding block. There's a template here to cut your sandpaper to the shape, so it'll look like this, right? It's the same size as this. And then you could insert it in here, wrap it around, and then insert it into this side. So we got plenty of sandpaper for that. And I do like to go through and just touch up the edges a little bit And then there's little barbs and burrs that occur after scraping and beveling. You can see one right here. Yep, see that? It's very, very light. There we go. There's a little one. So I just want to remove that kind of stuff. Go underneath. I should have done this before I took the protective coating off, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so that is good. If I run my finger around the edges, I don't feel anything. So I'm gonna wet this plate, and you can see the way that the water runs off of it. That's telling me, especially after handling it the way I just did with applying pressure, you can see that the water is beading up and condensing onto the plate in a kind of unique way. That's telling me that there's grease content on the plate. So watch how that runs off. And then I'm gonna take Ajax or Comet or Barkeeper's Friend. I usually use Comet. Ajax actually has been working pretty well for me. And this does have a little bit of abrasive in it. So I'm just gonna create a little bit of a paste. And I just use my fingers. Sometimes you have to do this a couple times. So I'll rinse this off and we'll see where we're at. So I can tell if it's been degreased properly based off how the water runs off. So you can see now the water is running off completely differently. And there's only a couple of small spots, you know, close to where, you know, fingerprints were again. So we'll just do a little bit more in a couple of those areas that I noticed. Rinse this off again. And there we go. Looks good. Okay. Now I'm gonna blot this. Dry my hands. I would try to get into the habit of blotting your plate, because at some points your plate is very sensitive. Like if I have hard ground on this and I'm just drying it off after removing it from the acid tray, that hard ground might be still wet, and so I would want to be more careful with that. So now I have my zinc plate. It has been cut, it's been beveled. I used some sandpaper around the edges and it's dry and ready to apply a hard ground. So I'm gonna do that in the next video.